putting a boundary in place for someone else feels like the band-aid solution until we can do the work that we no longer need the band-aid, that we're so secure in ourselves in that situation that we're able to show up in our power. A boundary is helpful, almost like a temporizing measure.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people-pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Kristeen is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Kristeen and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
We are absolutely racing away. We're just, our ideas are flying everywhere in this boundary series. I think this is just really close to our hearts, isn't it, Kristeen? It's a time when we both not only use boundaries, but we've had like a beautiful amount of success with boundaries in terms of we've both been in these situations where we've had standards for ourselves has been the main thing. Neither of us has been in situations recently, or at least that we talked about, that our safety has been compromised, which is, a more serious situation to set boundaries within which I hope that you will seek professional help in that situation. But I like to extend this out to as well, there's our standards that we can help our standards can our standards can be something that our boundaries can help us maintain and protect, which is really important at the end of the day. Like in the moment, it might seem like a champagne thing, but in the big picture of your life, living to your standards is the way that you're going to make sure that you're happy with your life. So welcome back to another episode. We are going to talk about the other side of boundaries, the dark side of boundaries today. But first, Kristeen set us up with a really great question at the end of the last episode.
Forgotten what that was. What was the question?
You were like, guys, let's make this practical. Let's make some case studies in our own life.
Well, yes, it's all coming back to me now. It was about 10 minutes ago we recorded the episode. Bear with me, team. I was just mesmerized. Before we do that, I was just mesmerized by what you were saying about boundaries allowing you to have standards. And I was thinking about how as we go through life, we're always setting new standards. I feel there's always an upgrade coming, right? So it just feels like this is relevant now, and it's always going to be relevant. And I hope everyone listening finds it relevant. Let's set some standards and let's upgrade old standards to even better standards. Let's do this thing. But yeah, so just to quickly recap on the last episode where Becc helped us to outline boundaries, what a boundary is, and she told us about those lines and the circle where in the middle of the circle is your ideal, and then you stretch the circle just a smidge and that's your acceptable limits, and anything outside of that is unacceptable. So that's where the line is. We talked about how you know when you've crossed the line because it feels bad, you've got a bad emotional reaction, you're resentful, you're just feeling triggered or activated, something's happened, it doesn't feel good, the line has been crossed. And then Becc was talking about the consequences to that. So knowing what the boundaries are and then knowing what the consequences are, meaning how would you plan to show up in your boundary? Like when you see that boundary again, what is your action plan? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Have I missed anything, Becc? Is that the...
Well, I might just say Kristeen has some advanced skills here, which is Kristeen's a highly intuitive person. And when she has emotions come up, she can usually work out which emotions are trustworthy, which ones are carrying real, authentic, on point messages, and which emotions are sort of smokescreens. For a lot of us, I just like to say, well, for the great majority of us, I'd like to say, me included, I can't trust every feeling I have in my body. So when Kristeen said, use your emotions to know when that line is being crossed, I just put a little asterisk there for the great majority of us and say, let those emotions be the thing that pricks your ears up. I like to think of them as smoke alarms. So you smell smoke. The smoke alarm is there to tell you there is potentially a life-threatening fire in your house and maybe you should do something about it. But for me, not the best cook in the world. Usually it's burnt toast. Okay. So usually for you guys, I want you to be interested in your emotions. I want you to hear your emotions. And then I want you to go and look, hey, has that line been crossed? Do I need to change something in this situation now? So thank you, Kristeen. You're just a bit too advanced for us.
But yeah, but I think it's still super useful, isn't it? That smoke alarm thing, so you can test the water. But when you do find that you have a boundary, I want everyone who's listening just to think about, where is this showing up for you? Because I'm willing to bet that you'll have one, if not 10 boundaries that you would like to set. So I want you to tune into the one that is coming up for you, the one that you'd most like to change or set, because what Becc is going to do in this episode is guide us through how to set a boundary in a way that leaves you empowered and is totally kind. But also, Becc, I know that you have this you actually have, I wouldn't say a problem with boundaries, but you actually, although you're going to teach us how to do this and do this well, you actually don't enjoy setting boundaries. You don't encourage your clients to set boundaries at all. Can you tell us a little bit about that sort of philosophy you have?
Yeah, my clients, I will have clients who are very self-aware come on the call with me, particularly when they're new. Only needs to happen once usually, and they'll say, I want to set a boundary. I think I need to set some boundaries. I need some more boundaries in my life. And yes. And first, I like to offer them something that, in my opinion, is way better than a boundary. And that is being the person who is in control of their own experience. Because why do we set a boundary? We set boundaries because we are unhappy with the situation that's happening around us, or probably more to the point, the experience that we're having and the way that we're showing up in that situation. So for example, people want to set a boundary if somebody is speaking to them in a particular way. Or stretching it out a bit further, people want to set a boundary if somebody disagrees with their value system, things like that. And people want to set a boundary when a colleague isn't listening to them. People want to set a boundary when, just in general, people aren't showing up the way they want to show up. And so we believe that they need to change in order for us to get what we want. Now, if I was able to control other people, if I was able to teach my clients how to control other people, I would be doing it. I would not be holding the back. Don't worry. I would give you guys that. I give it here in the podcast, I give it everywhere. I would love for you guys to control the world. I think we'd be in very good hands. And also, I would be so rich. But that is not, unfortunately, what I can say in my integrity is in my skill set. What I really teach my clients to do is to create clarity, choice, and control for themselves in their lives. So the reason that I don't recommend boundaries very much is because if we're overusing boundaries, then we're probably saying a lot of the time, this situation is affecting me, as opposed to, I am in control of my experience. I am the filter, the gatekeeper to my experience. I manage my mind. I manage my emotional experience. I decide how I show up in situations. And therefore, I can stand in any situation because I've got my own back here. This is idealistic. I want to say that up front. And I use boundaries in my life because that is idealistic. But I use boundaries sparingly because for me, I want to use these situations where I recognize, as Kristeen was saying in the first episode, we kind of discover where our line is along the way, usually when it gets crossed and those feelings come up and, there's that resentment that comes up or that sense of wanting to avoid someone or something because we think, oh, like if I'm in that situation, I won't be able to trust myself or I won't like the way I feel. Or I'm starting to resent this person because I believe that they have the ability to control me. I believe that they're affecting me. And we're just confused in those situations. We're confused. The truth is we are the gatekeepers. We are the people who get to decide how we experience the world and what we do in the world. So for me, I am always using those moments where I find myself confused about that to get unconfused, to get clarity. Where am I giving someone else or something else the power to affect me, the power to control me in my life? And at certain times, recently I have had some deadlines that I had self-imposed. These were deadlines for me. This was for Dare Darling, for the opening of Dare Darling, and therefore by extension for my beautiful, gorgeous members who I'm so happy to have with us, and also for my greater mission. I had to set boundaries. I decided to set boundaries because I did not want to use one extra ounce of my resources, my mental, emotional, energetic resources on managing my mind and managing my emotional responses and exploring why I was responding that way and working out how I could be more empowered. It's great work. But at that time in that period, I wanted to pour all of my energy into this project and this mission for myself. So at that time, I set boundaries. But now that I've gotten back more into my normal balance of life, I'm redirecting away from just removing myself and setting those boundaries. And I'm noting these instances more to recognize or ask the question, all right, I noticed that I've given up some power here. I'm saying that somebody else is affecting me. What am I going to do, or what do I want to do to get my power back? Does that make sense?
So good. And what's coming up for me, if I could correct me if I'm wrong, if it's too oversimplified, but what you're saying basically is sort of putting a boundary in place for someone else feels like the band-aid solution until we can do the work that we no longer need the band-aid, that we're so secure in ourselves in that situation that we're able to show up in our power. But what you're saying is that if you're not in a position where you can get to that stage where you're fully in your river, just solid, unshakable, then a boundary is helpful, almost like a temporizing measure. Is that right?
That's so brilliant. I had never thought about it like that. And actually, in the moment, that is probably... So there's the greater use of boundaries in these long-term relationships in terms of how we show up. And then there's the boundary in the moment. And the boundary in the moment, when I use it, is often that temporizing measure. I'm like, if I feel emotionally activated or I'm in some kind of distress, that line has been crossed, and I don't in that moment, with that higher level of arousal, with my sympathetic nervous system activated, in that state, I don't often have the capacity to do anything more than take care of myself in that moment. And so I'll use the boundary to do that first priority, take care of myself. And then later, once I have taken care of myself, then I can work out, hey, where did I lose my power? And all the exploring what's around that, as you say. A temporizing measure is actually a really good way to describe that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And can you just explore that in a little bit more detail for us? When you say the boundary that you're using is actually taking care of yourself, can you explain to us how that's a boundary and what that means?
So let's take the situation where I've been affected by somebody else, and therefore I'm in that disempowered state because I'm saying somebody else is affecting me. And please, guys, don't take this too far. Don't take it to the extreme. People can, of course, directly affect you. People can physically touch or harm you in a way that that does affect you. And we should probably put a disclaimer here that we're not talking about boundaries here in the context of any kind of abuse or violence. These boundaries are really, that we're talking about here, are really just within the realms of normal relationships, normal behaviors. We're not in the position to apply these to any kind of pathology or any abuse or situations such as that. But, take this situation where somebody said something to me, and for whatever reason, it's brought up thoughts in my mind that have created either this fight or flight response or a painful, wounded sort of response. So for me in that moment, if I'm using a boundary, the boundary isn't that I tell that person to stop doing what they're doing. The boundary isn't that I tell them that their behavior is unacceptable. But the boundary is that combination of I've recognized or I've perhaps discovered a new line here when somebody says something like that to me in this context or in that way, or for the third time, whatever the line is, I've now found in that situation that I have been hurt, or my nervous system has been activated. That situation there is really where my standard has been breached for myself. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm reacting from that place, or where I'm dismissing myself or perpetuating myself being in that place. The standard that I hold for myself here is that I take care of myself when I'm in that situation, not just because I think that it is the humane and kind, compassionate, loving thing to do that I would do for any other person in that situation. If I knew any of my loved ones, my friends, a stranger was in that internal situation, that's how I treat them too. So that's how I treat myself. It's my standard. Now, I cannot do that for myself with ease or in a lot of situations. Let's say in this situation, I can't do that for myself when I'm in the presence of somebody who is continuously verbally saying these things that are perpetuating these thoughts to me. And in that moment, I can't stop the thoughts. I don't have control of the thoughts. And this is something that I can, over time, get more and more control of. But in that slice of reality right there, I don't have the ability to interrupt my thoughts with my current skill set. And I'm currently being distressed by this emotion. So my boundary is that I would remove myself from that situation. Both cognitively, yeah, but more to the point physically here. I would remove myself. That is the consequence. And I do that because that allows me to take care of myself. That allows me to maintain that standard that I hold for myself in my life of treating myself that way.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And also, I just want to acknowledge that because I can see how this has definitely turned out for me when I'm learning what the boundary is. You were saying that your standard is to remove yourself and look after yourself. Beautiful. And sometimes I do that too. And there's also the truth is there's been other times in my life where I have let a little verbal something go back. You know what I mean? A little bit of verbal tennis of some sort. I don't know. Or just like, what do I do? How do I react? Cry?
I can bite back.
What I'm saying is, if you're not in a position like Beck to remove yourself and be all grown up about it, that's fine. That's okay. There's another imperfect way to be. And both scenarios give you data. I think that's so just to give everyone permission to be kind of normal and not a thought wizard quite yet in your journey. Yeah.
I would second that, because that is one situation. Then I also have the other situation where I'm just like, wow, let me tell you what I think about that. Let me tell you about my standard. Let me tell you about what's not acceptable. So you better stop. The reason that, apart from the fact that that's not loving towards them either, but it doesn't. So here's the thing. You're not going to get necessarily to that place of your ideal standard in your life in that moment when your boundary is being crossed. But removing myself gets me the closest I can back to my acceptable zone. Whereas if I was to choose to carry out the behavior of me then throwing, if they've said something, whether it be malicious or unintentional, if I then show up and say something from a place of hurt and probably trying to hurt the other person, or probably trying to bring them down or cut them down, or, do something to discredit what they've said. Now I'm acting out of my integrity. And so as powerful as that might feel, this is where it comes back to, what are you doing from love? You're doing this for yourself. You're doing this to move back towards your safety and your standards. That's the whole point of the boundary. That's what the consequence should always do. It should move you back towards, if not well and truly within. So Kristeen and I will talk more about these really difficult situations. It's worth talking about. It's by the time you've set a boundary, you've done a lot of work usually, you've been through a lot. And then this other person with their own ideas about how the world should be and how you should act and how they want their standards to be and what's good for them, they're likely going to have their own reaction to your boundary. And for my people pleasers, my friends and family, I feel like any people pleaser I'm connected to by blood somehow, this is something that presents a threat to us, in the sense that it's often it's a significant vulnerability in us, a space where we can go back on our boundary and to try and soothe the other person, because we're hearing or interpreting that they're hurt or they're being hostile towards us. Then it can have us turn around and abandon ourselves in that moment when we work so hard to get to that boundary point. So Kristeen and I want to talk to you guys more in the next episode about this critical second step that nobody ever talks about in boundaries, that I think needs to be done not only to execute on the boundary all the way to the end, but also, Kristeen brought this up at the start, to actually make us willing to set the boundary in the first place. Because for a lot of us, the idea of somebody being hostile towards us or being hurt by us setting a boundary is enough to make us be like, let's just leave that to another day or another year or another person to do, because that's not something that I want to be involved with.
Yeah. And I can't wait to jump into the next episode, where we will be unpacking all of that more hazardous side, or the part we're scared of when setting a boundary. Oh my goodness, I can't wait. But I guess in terms of, just for everyone who's listening, right at the start, we talked about thinking about your boundary. So now that you have that boundary top of mind, the next thing is to think about that consequence that Becc said, in terms of making a plan for the next time that boundary, you interact with that boundary or with someone else who's creeping up on your little boundaries, and how are you going to respond? And I feel like this technique that you've shown us, Becc, in terms of obviously ideally getting to the stage where we can absolutely be in control of our experience the whole time and not really have to set a boundary, as like the ninja level stuff. And in the meantime, having this plan of how you're going to respond as you execute on your boundary, which could just be, looking after yourself, like you say, removing yourself from the situation, allowing yourself the space and time and disconnection in order to further evaluate on that boundary when it comes up and you are rattled by it. And then that's the band-aid, and then we'll work towards that solution, sort of more ninja level, thought wizard style.
So beautifully said. And I like to give my clients both options as well. I like to have them explore the boundary, because it's just so like we said in the first episode, it's a really nice place of strength to give yourself. Like, it's almost like when you go to the worst case scenario sort of thing. Like, it's a decision you can make ahead of time to easily have your own back in that case. And that's really what boundaries, I think, help us do in so many ways. They help us define ahead of time, before we're in that, really activated state, what is our stand? And then they also help us decide ahead of time, and what am I going to do if I land in that situation? And that can also really form some really powerful permission giving from ourselves. A more calm, in integrity version of myself earlier, when I wasn't activated, decided this was a good idea. I can trust her. So I'm just going to execute on that boundary. So come on back to our next episode as we talk about this next crucial step in boundaries that's going to help you guys not only be able to execute on the boundary to the end, but also feel more empowered and excited to set the boundary.
Amazing. Can't wait to see you guys there. Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in the clouds.